Hello, everyone. Welcome to MD Media's weekly show, the H panel. Uh, since 2 weeks ago, we have moved it from Fridays to Sundays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Welcome. Today, we'll be talking about 3 months after Pretoria. Is peace holding? We'll be asking that question, and we'll get insights from our esteemed panelists. Today, I'm joined by what we had last week. Professor Gil Gapisa, Duke Burbridge, and Faisal Robla with me. We'll start as usual with the highlights for each panelist. Faisal, we'll start today with you. What's a highlight for you over the past 7 days?
Yes, thank you very much and welcome, my colleagues. I think what stood out for me are two interrelated issues. One is in the Somali region, and the other one is generally what had happened in Ethiopia's education. In the Somali region, last week, the Ethiopian government ordered the regional government to ban about 15 media outlets, and these media outlets are both local as well as global. Global in the sense that BBC is one of them, Universal is another one, and a host of media outlets that usually cater to Somali speakers in the region. As you know, there is no independent TV station or radio station in the Somali region. There's only one media outlet called the Somali Regional TV, which is a government TV. The last one that was independent was Nabat TV, run by the former minister of women in at the federal level. That was also closed. Now, closing mass media in the Somali region seems to feed into the complete failure and meltdown of Ethiopia's education, because it looks like, on the one hand, the government is controlling what people can listen and not listen, what they can read and not read. On the other hand, Ethiopia's leaving certificate exam, as reported by the Minister of Education, Birhanu Nega, is really a very, very sad case. Only less than 3% of the almost 1 million students that were tested for the exam apparently passed. 3%. If I remember, Jesse Jackson some time ago and said the bad situation of American education is so bad that if there was a country behind the letdown of the US education, it would be tantamount to declaration of war. And that was really like at a very high level of educational achievement. What we have seen with Ethiopia this week, 3% passing rate, close to 1,100 schools have not had a single student passing the exam. And I think in some killis, you have almost the entire student body failing and not even getting the chance to ever attend to the university. Now, I listened to Burhan Naga's presentation, and he blamed everybody under the earth. He really sounded to me a senator who's coming from South Carolina, who's a Republican, by finally blaming the student, the mother, the working peasant who is trying to raise 6, 7 children and feeding them while they're attending school. And basically, he did, although he included those whom he's blaming, the leadership, but he was not as strong. I think if anybody failed the Ethiopian student from corner to corner, it's not the working mother, it's not the father who is a peasant, it's not the Tigrenya father who was trying to feed his children, or the other Oromo father who is trying to protect his children, or the Somali father and mother who has been subjected to such harassment. It is Ethiopia's top leadership, primarily Prime Minister Abiy and Burhan Nagga, who have been watching when this entire national educational policies ended in a melting down. I don't think anybody is going to pay a price, because we have known how Ethiopia always escapes from its own crimes. I think they're gonna shift this away and just put in a good language to say that we have learned lessons and we'll move on. I think at minimum, at minimum, the Minister of Education should resign because he has proven that he cannot handle the job. And all along the last 2 years, he was busy intellectualizing the war in the north. Whether that war was justified or not, we will talk about that. But he has really reneged on his position, on his responsibility, and the earlier he vacates that position, the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. I think this is a major news, of course, in a land of a number of major news, per week. Scale highlights for you.
Yeah, yeah. I just listened to that presentation as well, and I agree with my friend Faisal that that the blame goes around to parents and everybody else, not the government. That I'm actually thinking like there is a conspiracy there that if all of these people actually pass the exam, let's say 50% pass the exam, which is really bad as it is, if only 50% passes, and all of them went to the university, and all well maybe half of them passed. There is really no economy in Ethiopia to shoulder them. So did the students fail, or did the government itself failed them on purpose? And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but this is unprecedented in Ethiopian history. 3% uh, uh, passage of a national exam. It's stunning. But what stood out for me is if that's one failure in the education sector, the violence is not really abating. Uh, what stood out for me is the escalating violence in Wallo, in northern Ethiopia. The international community is focused on this peace deal or the cessation of violence in northern Ethiopia, as they call it, in Tigray, and the implementation of the peace accord. The U.S. has expressed concern, as they do, about the war across the Oromia region. Uh, While the war in the Oromia region is, of course, a matter of concern, it is raging all over Oromia in western, central, and southern Oromia. You probably hear the news. If that is a matter of deep concern in Oromia, even for the international community. For those of us who are following the developments by the day, I just wonder if there is a cessation of hostilities in Ethiopia in general. But what the world doesn't know, or what most Ethiopia observers don't know, that the war in northern Ethiopia is not over. It's the guns are not silent because Wallo is in northern Oromia. Wallo is a special zone in the Amhara regional government. A war of ethnic cleansing and possibly genocide is going on in Wallo. It's not been reported. It's Oromo speaking area, so it could be seen as part of the war against Oromo rebels, and that's the reason that the Amara regional government is offering for their intervention in the Wallo region. But in the last 2 weeks in the Wallo region, we have witnessed an indescribable violence. Security forces claim that, as you say, that they claim that they're trying to wipe out the Shane, the Oromo Liberation Army. That's what they say. The Oromo Liberation Army has now replaced the TPLF because if there is any incident in Ethiopia before the peace deal, it was instigated by the TPLF. If there is any violence, any clash, any skirmish anywhere in Ethiopia today, it is the OLA. So the rationale, the reason for the conflict in northern Ethiopia, in the Wallo region, against the civilian population, against defenseless mothers and women, uh, is in northern Ethiopia. In northern Ethiopia, ethnic cleansing is really going on. It started on January the 15th, and the forces organized by the Amhara regional government, because these forces are composed of the Amhara Special Forces, the Amhara Police, the Amhara Fano, Amhara militia, and other mercenaries have unleashed again violence against the Wallo region, the Wallo region of Oromo, which had actually spread over to the Oromia region proper in northern Shawa. In the last count that I have is about 68 people have been killed, mothers and defenseless children, their throats have been slit. Houses have been burned in urban centers. We saw the videos, the pictures. Farmers' houses are burned to the ground. All kinds of brutality have been visited upon the Oromo in northern Ethiopia, or the Amhara region. While the Amhara region is doing this, the ENDF is not intervening. Wherever they are, they're just watching while homesteads are being burned, shops are being burned to the ground. They're not doing anything. Whether this is out of fear of not confronting the Amhara regional state, or unable, or basically to defend them, or condoning it, I do not know, but the ENDF is not intervening. The one time that they intervened to try to insert themselves between the Amhara regional forces and the local Oromo in Wallo, in the Kamisei zone, they too were attacked by the Amhara regional forces. That means the ENDF themselves were also attacked when they started to insert themselves in between. So, on the other hand, the Amhara regional state is organizing violence against its own residents. It was supposed to provide security for them, but it is not. It is actually the agent of brutality that is killing and maiming and conducting scorched earth violence against its own citizens. Except that the Wallo Oromo are different from the Amhara region linguistically and in their religion. They're not Orthodox, they're Muslims. But they're being routed, they're being killed everywhere, and it is spreading to northern Shawa, as I said. Now, the ARS, the Amhara regional state, that it has desired to cleanse that region, the region called the Amhara region, is no secret. They have conducted the same kind of violence now for 4 years against the Kamans. They have done the same kind of violence against the Ago. And now it's the turn of the Oromo to complete the work that they started about 3 years ago, because the war against the Oromo has been going on for the last 4 years. To be honest, the Wallo Oromo have endured the siege in that region for 400 years, but they have managed to survive by defending themselves without needing the help of rebel forces from Oromia proper. But the desire to ethnically cleanse the Amhara region has been known, and that they have now come out, and some of their supporters, if not officials of the Amhara government, their supporters overseas are actually saying, let's swap population. Let the Amhara that are being attacked, of course they say Amharas are attacked in Wallo, that are being attacked in Wallaga, move to the Amhara region and settle in Wallo, and then the Oromo in Wallo move to Wallaga. They have started to float that kind of idea of swapping population. So it's an organized violence against the Wallo and throughout the Oromia region. And let it be known, that this is orchestrated by the prosperity government. Its functionary in the Amhara region is basically organizing its forces to ethnically cleanse the Wallo Oromo from the region that they've lived in for the last the known history of the last maybe 500, 600 years. So the escalating violence in Wallo is what stands out for me. But to connect it to one issue that I raised about the Orthodox Church, that is also re-escalating. The war of words being exchanged between the two groups is really a matter of concern. It should be. But what I am concerned about, and what should be a concern for everybody, is I think Ethiopia is now on top of the many problems, economic, political, administrative problems that it has, or the problem of peace that they have. Now they are in for a sectarian conflict. That's what it seems to me in Ethiopia.
Thank you, Eskel. I was trying to get a video of the burning down. This is a very small.
የአማራ ፋኖና የአማራ ልዩ ኃይል እንደዚህ እያነደደው ይገኛል ኦነግ ሸኔን።
Yeah, that was a short clip. Duke, as usual, you would cover the humanitarian aspect for UMD Media. What stood out for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this week what stood out for me was I guess it's the weekly or the bi-weekly announcement that Eritrean troops have left Tigray, which is something that it's been repeated. It's been repeated since 2021, and it hasn't happened yet. It was confirmed on Friday by U.S. officials that they hadn't left yet. I think this is the second time U.S. officials have had to step in and say no, they haven't left yet. But the Eritrean presence is still problematic. It's still blocking aid to the areas that they're in. We got to a point where about 3 months out from the Pretoria agreement, where you've had unhindered humanitarian access, just like you did in beginning of April when they opened the blockade again. You can see the chart that I've made here. Interestingly enough, 12 weeks out, we're at the same place, around the same level that they were at before. That was with a huge restriction on fuel, but fewer restrictions on where food could actually go. You see the big hump there in the middle that starts at about week 6. That was distributing food to places that were still under Tigrayan control, de facto local authorities. What the problem with this is that the food has not gotten into the central zone and the northwest zone and parts of the eastern zone. I know I sound like a broken record because I say this every week, but this is what's happened. And there's no telling when that's going to open up. There are problems with fuel. There's not enough fuel, or there wasn't enough fuel as of last week. There's probably still not enough fuel, but there wasn't enough fuel. So you have so many things right now still hindering the humanitarian response, and that's a huge problem because the people in central and the people in the northwest zones, many of them are displaced. We don't have numbers on how many are displaced. We don't have a reasonable assessment of the sites that they're being hosted in. They were in horrible conditions about a year ago, before the first occupation ended. They're still in horrible situations now, of course, and there are a number of hindrances on the humanitarian response. Now, the one thing that isn't happening is nobody's talking about what those hindrances are. There's some discussion about Eritrean troops are still in the region, and it's important that that these lies be called out if they say that they've left. But at this point, there needs to be a more aggressive posture by the United States, by the UN, to get food to people who need it. This is not peace. It's not peace when people are starving to death. It's not peace when IDPs are housed in temporary sites that are being moved to other sites and there's no communication. It is chaos right now for people who need food, for people who need basic staples of survival. There is no peace. There's only chaos, and that needs to end. The war against the Tigrayan people has to end, and it hasn't yet.
I gather this is you wrote it. It was published just a few hours ago.
Yeah, that was earlier this morning.
You wanna speak to that?
Yeah, no, I covered a little bit of it, but this is I wrote this for Tigat. I've been writing almost a column there almost every week, just trying to capture what's been going on. And the issue, there are two things that I'm worried about here. One is the fact that food seems to have been going very easily into certain areas of the Northwest and certain areas of the southern zones. Those areas very likely are being ethnically cleansed. This was the model that they used in Western Tigray to just wipe out the people who were there, push them out, which the people have been pushed out, and then to repopulate it. That seems to be what's happening. You see that there's been developments recently about, restructuring the government in some of the cities there in the southern zone. That's a huge concern. The real problem, though, is that the people who are displaced throughout northwest and central zone, they need to get back to their farms. They need to get back to their fields. They need to be plowing right now. They need to be preparing to plant so that Tigray can get off of food insecurity by November. Because if they don't get crops in, if they don't plant, there's not going to be a harvest. And if they don't have the tools and tractors and draft oxen and everything that's been stolen, that is not going to there's no forgiving in nature. If they don't plow, they're not going to plant. If they don't plant, they're not going to be able to harvest. So all of the sort of the hands-off approach that the world has taken towards Tigray and towards the crimes that have been committed against people in Tigray, that needs to stop. They can't wait until the UN Security Council is willing to say that Eritrean soldiers looted the hell out of northern Tigray. They need those tractors now. They need the seeds now. I know they're getting some seeds in, but they need more. They need fertilizer. They need everything that you have to have a successful harvest. They haven't had that. They need stability. They need food. They need security. They need their families to be secure. All of those things need to happen. Eritrean forces need to go out. Supplies need to come in. Security needs to be established, and stability needs to be established in Tigray.
Thank you for that, Duke. So we'll go to the topic of the day. 3 months after Pretoria, is peace holding? And you guys have touched it. I mean, the main news in Ethiopia is close to 1 million, or to be specific, 896,520 students took the examination. And those who scored more than 50% are only 3.3%. And another one is this heavyweight politician from the former EPRDF was released this week as well. I don't know if there is any reading into that. And regionally, we have seen Russian foreign minister visiting Asmara, and according to reports, actually agreeing on using the port of Massawa, including the airport, for logistical purpose by Russia. The speech made by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Eritrea, where he accused the US, Europe, and the EU and Canada for crimes committed in their own countries and elsewhere, and how Eritrea was defending everything and so on. I don't know if you can speak to that as well in relation to the topic. And Abiy Ahmed was as well in Sudan, um, uh, almost on the same day, I would say. All this and the US confirming through the US ambassador to the UN, that Eritrea is still in Ethiopia. This is just 2 days after the NDF director for communication and foreign relations, I guess, gathered military attaches in Addis Ababa, saying there is no non-NDF, ANDF force in Tigray, in the whole Tigray. So this is what we are reading. So what is your take on this topic? Is peace holding, given all these moving parts in the Horn, Faisal?
Yeah, Getachew, I think the Horn of Africa has been busy for the last 1 week. And before I get there, I would like to just touch a couple of key issues still pertaining to the education fiasco that we have seen. As you said, in some 3%, 3.3% was the average, the nationwide. In the Somali region, only 0.7 people passed. In the Afar, it's I think about 0.3. And the question is why? I mean, at least in the Somali regional government, they made education a big deal. They sent such fabricated reports to Addis Ababa by saying that in the last 4 years that Mustafa has been there or being installed, he has built 500 schools, majority of them high schools. 500. Number one, I think a rational human being who knows construction and policy planning would know that it's impossible, even by American standard, with the access that they have to banks and money, to build 500 schools. Out of that 500, which in most of the cases remained phantom schools, 18 of those schools were never really, you know, quantified as to where they are. On paper, they existed, but nobody knows, and they even admitted. So the money was allocated, but the physical presence of the schools were never to be seen. And this is very, very common in all the regions. Abiy talks about, small chump change, corrupt people that he is going after. These are the big tickets that somebody needs to recognize. And if really anybody wants to understand why education failed at the national level, you have to also look at the tentacles that feed into the national education, and mainly why uh, you know regional schools did bad, and why a few of NGO run schools like the Catholic schools or some boarding schools that don't depend directly on the Khalil governments or on the national government are the ones who probably account for the largest number of students who passed. Proportionally, they will even make uh, in the 90%. There are schools where not single student failed, whereas in some areas there are regional states where only a handful students passed. 1160 schools did not show a single student passing, and overwhelmingly these are in low income or regional governments and regional schools. A very sad picture. People talk about failed states when the government and that country disappears. No, I think failed states is when the country can no longer administer its own affairs. In the educational sector, if that is any indication for Ethiopia, indeed Ethiopia is a failed state. I mean, even before you go to the war in Oromia or to the war in Tigray. Having said that, I think, yes, the Horn of Africa has been diplomatically busy. I think it's a sign of a Cold War in a way, for the Russians to put their big boots in Eritrea is a bad omen for some and a good omen for others. For those who like Eritrea to flex its muscle, finally Eritrea get a protector who can even make sure that Eritrea's air space is protected. Some people will read into that. And I think most pro-Isaias forces are very happy about what Russia promised to them. And if the two countries sign military pact, then that will carry Isaias far. For Abiy, it is really a sort of a mixed message. On the one hand, in the short term, he wants Eritrea to be strong because Isaias is protector. In the long run, a very strong, stable, powerful, militarily established Eritrea is a menace to Abiy as well as to Ethiopia. How does Abiy prepare for this? We cannot tell. We have not known Abiy for looking at the long trajectory of his country. He has always been a short-term kind of person who gets his gratifications from the day-to-day activity, and that's why he prematurely started a war in Tigray. That's why he's now saying he will eliminate Ola, a struggle that has been going on since 1972. And that tells you that Abiy is not looking at the big picture, but anybody who knows Eritrean Ethiopian long-term relationships, provided what had happened in the past from the 1940s and 1950s when Eritrea was forcefully put into the Ethiopian sphere. I think the mission that you have seen and the movement that you have seen both in Asmara and in Addis Ababa tells me that a new chapter of Cold War is in the horizon.
Okay, thank you, Faisal, for that. Scale, on the same question, what's your reading of what's happening in Addis, in Magala, Masawa, and Khartoum?
That's a lot. That's a lot. I just wanted to focus on what I mentioned about the commotion in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is a monumental development, and I'm following it very closely. But that's an issue, another matter. And I summed it up saying that the country is really in for a religious conflict, sectarian conflict. But focusing only on the issue of the day, which is the peace. Nearly after 3 months after being signed, is it holding? I think the ceasefire or whatever deal that they had in Pretoria and then drew out an implementation plan in Nairobi, the Ethiopian government and the leaders of Tigray. Technically speaking, it appears to be holding technically, and I say technically because I don't know if there is bullets flying and people being killed and reported in cities, but there is a lot of violence that's still going on around the country. It appears to be holding, in my view, because Tigray's authorities are basically bending over backwards to fulfill their side of the bargain. They want the peace. They want the peace to work. They want stability in their region. They're doing everything that they're asked for. They have disarmed. They have handed over heavy weapons and tanks to the Ethiopian government. So in that sense, they're keeping their side of the bargain. Some basic services, such as banking, have restarted in some places in Tigray, but I hear reports that some individuals whose bank accounts have been frozen during the duration of the war are finding out that their accounts were not actually frozen. Even though they were ostensibly frozen, they weren't. They're finding that millions of birr, millions of birr from individual accounts of Tigrayan descent have already been withdrawn. Some of the evidence that I got report of is that accounts that were opened in Addis, they were withdrawn in Bahrdar in millions. This is only the first wave. This is the first area where individual banks have been accounted. They are being emptied out. So we will see what will happen. And if this is going to be a widespread practice, that individual accounts that have been frozen have already been used, then that would be a problem. Telecommunications are being restored and functioning intermittently, but not continuously, and desperately needed humanitarian aid, as Duke was talked about. Some humanitarian relief is making its way into Tigray, but it's not getting to the areas, getting to the people who actually desperately need that relief. Now, the number of people that were killed in this conference in the north, not accounting for the other killing fields in the Command area, in the Benishangul area, in Oromia, in Afar and Somalia, not counting those, it's about more than 1 million. We've heard that number. At least someone has crunched about 600,000 people were killed. Close to 200,000 admitted by the Ethiopians in secret meetings. That's almost an established fact that Ethiopia has also lost a lot of people. A lot of soldiers have been killed in this conflict. So basically, this is the humanitarian toll of the conflicts in Ethiopia is appalling. It's disgusting. What is sad is that it doesn't seem that the Ethiopian leaders have learned anything from this deadly conflict, the deadliest conflict in the world. They've not learned anything. They're not devoting themselves to peace. In fact, the Ethiopian Prime Minister had been showing off his military muscles in Awash Arba uh, uh, only this week. Only this week they were showing off their tanks, armored personnel carriers, and yesterday was boasting about an integrated air infantry, special forces, um, and other forces in, con, conducting an integrated, he said, 21st century fighting where Ethiopia could end the war within a few days. I don't know why Ethiopia needs to do that. I don't know why the Ethiopian leader needs to show off his military muscle just only three months after concluding the deadliest and largest war uh, uh, in the world. So there is peace, but this show of force, either it is meant to intimidate people because he doesn't have the military itself is hollowed out, or is they're not committed to peace. So what I was seeing in Awash Arba, the prime minister uh, donning um, uh, maybe a hunting hunting fatigue or military fatigue was only talking war. You cannot really talk about peace when there is always a discourse of war in the country. And then there are really three fundamental issues that make me say that there is only technically holding. Um, the ceasefire should translate into sustainable peace. That's what the country needs. That's what's needed in Ethiopia and in the Horn of Africa, and maybe for the entire world. The ceasefire must become a sustainable peace. Otherwise, we'll go back to to the conflict. The three fundamental issues must be settled for the ceasefire to become a sustainable peace. The presence of the Eritrean forces in Tigray, specifically in Tigray, but all over Ethiopia, is a matter of deep concern. Eritrea is not leaving, as Getachew, you say that the United States and major newspapers are reporting that Eritreans are not leaving. They're not leaving at least Western Tigray, and they're not going to leave Western Tigray. And that's the second point. The status of the contested areas, if the operative mechanism for settling the issues is the Ethiopian constitution, Western Tigray is still an occupied region. So what led to the war, if corrections are not made, it's only technically that the bullets are not flying. I cannot say that this is really holding. And the third is accountability. Accountability for the war crimes, the ethnic cleansing, the genocide that was perpetrated. Where there is no accountability, as we said last time, where there is no accountability for the severe human rights abuses that occurred in the context of the war, the idea that the peace deal is holding is only technical. Now, let me say this and finish. If the Eritreans, the ones that are leaving, are emptying out Tigray, looting everything that they find, jerry cans and all kinds of things, I don't know if Eritrea is in desperate need of all of those goods, or if this is also a weapon of war, just making it sure that Tigrayans don't have anything to subsist on. The trucks that we have seen that the Eritreans are taking out of Tigray doesn't bode well, in my estimation, that the Eritreans are withdrawing to make room for peace. It looks like they are just emptying it out, sweeping anything that human beings could subsist on out of Tigray. Technically, it's holding. Really, I'm not sure.
Hmm. Thank you for that. We asked as well after the claim made by the military officer in Addis to AU officials and military attaches from different countries. We asked Getachew Reda, who is the one of the senior officials of the PLF, and he confirmed to UMD Media that's not true. So Eritrean forces are everywhere, and we also talked to a journalist in Tigray. He specifically mentioned the areas where they are present, including the area of Zalambesa on the left and right side of the main road, and in Gulomakheda and in Nairobi areas, and of course Western Tigray as well. Duke, specifically on the Russian visit to Masawa, and where they talk about actually multipolar centers of power, all that, accusing the US. I don't know if you have followed that, but what is your reading? Because the US has been unwilling to act on Isaias in terms of their presence. They were saying they should leave and so on, but no meaningful action. So we have seen a number of envoys, Chinese envoy to the Horn of Africa, Russian envoy to the Horn of Africa, going to Asmara, and now the Russian foreign minister. That's the first time he went to Asmara, and many like Zgail was mentioning, Faisal was mentioning, this is might be something that would change what would be playing out in the coming months. So what's your reading there?
Yeah, it's a really a challenging situation for the U.S. because we have sort of withdrawn from our positions on human rights and our positions on even democracy for the most part with Ethiopia, and by withdrawing from those, we make ourselves weak. I know that there's this concept of with the realpolitik, sometimes you have to allow some things to happen in order to make geopolitical progress. But if you are a country that's unwilling to commit to no human rights, there was about 2 months ago, the UK came out with a statement. I think it was about 2 months ago, where they said, look, we're not going to really look at human rights as a deciding factor on diplomacy as much anymore. If you can't say that, then you have to stick to human rights. You have to support them, at least in other countries, at least when you have the opportunity. And the United States is losing the Horn of Africa, is losing geopolitical strength all over the world. I think because we have proven so ineffective at protecting these virtues or ideals that we claim to hold, haven't always lived up to, of course, but that we promote certainly throughout the world. And by doing that, by appearing ineffectual, by appearing completely weak on those areas, it creates an economy for China and Russia at the Security Council to sort of sell off protection. Of course, they need countries like Ethiopia to need their protection because that puts them in their pocket, so to speak. And so they need to have more people for this sovereignty block that I call it, where it's sovereignty trumps genocide, sovereignty trumps human rights, sovereignty trumps humanitarian need. And I mean, these things are just complete attacks on the concepts of human rights or genocide or humanitarianism. But that's sort of the angle. And so the U.S. is trying to. It appears that the West, maybe not as much the U.S. as much as some of the European countries, are trying to rehabilitate Abiy and the Prosperity Party administration. And I think that makes people nervous in Russia. I think it makes people nervous in China. They've cultivated relationships with Ethiopia, and to be honest, they've stuck with them. Uh, Interestingly enough, the U.S. has too, but it's more in vogue to blame the U.S. for a lot of the issues that Ethiopia seems to be having right now. But they see that if Abiy is rehabilitated in Washington D.C. or in Europe or in the UN, then that costs them. That's going to be, it is a zero-sum game that I think both people see, Russia and China and the United States and our allies. They see that if Abiy goes too far to one side or to the other side, they lose traction. They lose some of their investment. And so I think they're probably a little worried about that. I think shoring up their support in Eritrea, that's probably a good thing for the Eritrean regime, probably a bad thing for the Eritrean people. But you'll see, I mean, the fruits of these engagements, these relationships, they tend to not work out for the people of Ethiopia. And if I could just talk to the whether peace is holding or not, we've made the bar so low for peace that it is holding, because the only thing, it's not even that the bullets have been silenced, is as long as you're firing at somebody and it doesn't fire back, that's peace right now in Tigray. If the Eritreans are still killing civilians, that's something that we don't talk about. If they're still starving people, families, that's something that doesn't get talked about. If no progress is happening on the government side, that's not to be talked about. But as far as they're not shooting at combatants anymore, that has been reestablished. They had that for months during this war, where combatants weren't really shooting at each other. But as far as peace goes, the only way we still have it is because the word peace is fairly meaningless to the people of Tigray right now. They do not have the what peace is supposed to promise them. In certain areas, they're getting food now. They still have some protection, but in the areas that were already taken by the Ethiopian government and government aligned forces, which includes the Amhara extremists that we were talking about with the Fano, who continues the civilian massacres all over Ethiopia, not just in Tigray. It includes the Eritreans. It includes the special forces. All of these people, and you have no idea if they're actually going to pull back from Tigray at any point. You may see columns of soldiers leaving Tigray. You may see, some sort of ceremony of people leaving. But they had Eritrean blocking aid a year and a half ago. The CNN exposed this. A year and a half ago, you had this. You have Amhara's special forces. Whether or not they get integrated into it, I was a little worried when he was talking about an integrated military force, because that's what Ethiopia does. They have an integrated military force. It's the military, the militias, the regional security, and Eritrea in this case. If they all become integrated into the force that's supposed to be occupying Tigray, you're never going to have peace. And I can't say when this will boil over, when this is going to actually, when you won't be able to say there's peace anymore. Who knows? But the peace they have now is not very helpful for the people of Tigray. The people of Tigray need peace. The people of Ethiopia need peace, not just the elite, not just the combat. And I don't think that's happening.
Great, thank you, Doc, for that. On the scale you mentioned about the military parade, it happened for the second time, and the Prime Minister was also talking to scholars, intellectuals, I think from the university professors this week. Faisal, I don't know if you have been following. So, what are you hearing or reading from Addis Ababa? Is there any, I mean, despite Eritrea is not leaving and Amhara forces are still in Western Tigray, do you see a sustaining voice from Addis in terms of commitment for peace? We shouldn't forget what's happening in Oromia, we shouldn't forget, what's happening elsewhere as well, what Skill mentioned in Wallo, etc. So overall, is there any chance in the coming months, any real commitment for peace to hold uh, as we pass the 3 months mark of after Pretoria?
Yeah, I think it's nominally holding, as Eskel touched and Duke also touched, nominally in the sense that we don't hear guns being fired. But the principle of peacemaking, in my opinion, has not been endorsed by Addis Ababa in the same way that TPLF Makale has. And here is the reason why. Every week, you hear a high ranking official from Addis Ababa, be that a minister or an equal level of person, basically saying things that are contrary to the peacemaking. The last one was last week when, a minister, I believe, said that there is nothing or no Eritrean or foreign troops left in Tigray. Now, the entire world and the average citizen of Ethiopia, let alone the people in Tigray who walk by every day, uh, Eritrean troops, or who have been harassed by Eritrean troops, or who see looting being taken by Eritrean, you kind of ask, like, why would somebody, and we know how Abiy is grip tight when it comes to who says what, why would a minister come out to the podium and say that there are no Eritrean troops when we know, even if you rule out troops elsewhere, Western Tigray alone is enough. Shire and all that area, they are still there. So why would they say? I honestly believe that Abiy is playing two cards. On the one hand, he's playing one card to the West, which is, that technically peace holding. The other one is Abiy not really buying into this whole concept of peacemaking. And he really believes that peacemaking with Tigray is a useless subject simply because they're not trustworthy. Here is a guy who was calling them cancer. He's a guy whose generals were saying that they have destroyed TPLF and TDF, and then spread it in the, here is a prime minister who say that he will, bomb Tigray to the stone ages and all that. So when you put all these things, and then you see his minister is, every now and then coming with something to sabotage, in any world, in any part of the world, when peace is dealt and two sides signed, a sitting minister, if he or she says something like that, they will probably be fired, or at minimum they will be downgraded, let alone a minister. Even in local governments, when a mayor says something and mayor sets a policy, if say a commissioner or a general manager in that city says something contrary to the policy of the mayor, they are either fired or they are downgraded. So with Africa, you don't just say what you want, because you are under autocratic system. So I think Abiy is having his cake and eating at this point in time. I think, as everybody said, the Tigray side is the only side that's really sustaining up to this point peace for various reasons, one of which is in the Tigray population, there is a hunger for peace. Now, I think it was a scale, and Duke, both of them mentioned the demonstration of military prowess that Abiy, shared with the public. Now, that's contrary to peacemaking, not only with Tigray, but with the rest of the world. I think there is a message he's sending to Tigray, but also there is a bigger message that he's sending to Oromo and Oromo, fighters and the rest of Ethiopia. Now, in my opinion, the three major issues that we need to really focus when it comes to the peace holding. Yes, is Eritrea leaving? No. And the question is, why isn't Eritrea leaving? Simply because Abiy has not asked publicly. We have not seen a statement or a policy etiquette or ordinance that passed Addis Ababa that says, Eritrea, from this time to this time, we want all your uh, uh, troops to be out, or at least come up with an exit program, and Abiy has not asked that. Therefore, he is sanctioning for Eritrea to stay. The other one that really makes the peace technical, as Scale said, is yes, in a small part of Ethiopia, the gun is silenced, but in the bigger geography called Ethiopia, there are more guns today being heard than anywhere else in the world, even more than Ukraine. And that tells us that peace deal in the Ethiopian geography is not there. And then that third would be, in my opinion, the brewing conflict in the east, particularly in the Somali region. If things don't change, I'll give anywhere from 6 months to a year for the eastern front of Ethiopia to again explode. And Abiy is not naive, and his generals, they have intelligence, enough intelligence to show that Somalis are fed up, Somalis are frustrated. There are multiple discussions outside the normal governance that Ethiopia holds tight that are really raising question like what's to be done. And what's the to be done does not rule out Somalis is going back to the drawing table and finding out what is left for them, because they don't see the needle moving towards what they have fought for, which is a democratic federal system. They feel like they are in an autocratic system comparable to that of Mengistu. Actually, some people would even say, when you look at education, not arresting elders, people moving in and out, media not being suppressed, at least such as literature. A lot of people are saying that Abiy's autocratic nature is more to the right than Haile Selassie's time. No elder used to be arrested during Haile Selassie's time. Now everybody, including pious religious figures, are being arrested if they speak for their constituency. So anybody who sees Ethiopia's the calm, the storm before, the calm before the storm, and cashes on that is really mistaken. It's more precarious. Of course, Tigray, the guns are silenced, but it is just a temporary thing. But people are still dying either from hunger because of the siege, from Eritrean issues, or the big issue. And I really here sympathize with the Tigrania average person, the psychological bust that has been bestowed on that population. They don't know whether they're Ethiopians or not. They are only Ethiopians, in my opinion, today because of the international order. Eritrea was an Ethiopian one time, but luckily they got out. And what happened to Tigray did not happen to Eritrea in any way you measure it. So the peace could hold, but at this point in time, it's precarious, and 3 months is a short time to evaluate. I think we need to look in the horizon. If things change in the coming 6 months, we have to see.
Great, thank you for that. Scale on, you touched a couple of times about what's happening within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and what followed the appointment of 26 bishops by 3 archbishops in Oromia. Now they are calling actually themselves as the Holy Synod, Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Tewahedo Church, Oromia and Nations and Nationalities Holy Synod. And there was an exchange of excommunication between the two. I just received an 11-page letter from the Oromia and Nations and Nationalities Synod news briefing. I think it was from yesterday. And you connected it to the topic of peace and stability. I don't know if you want to take a moment to maybe speak to that subject, given that on the media we are seeing a lot of very aggressive exchange, and that on top of what has been going on in Oromia, in Tigray, and elsewhere in terms of war, this could be, as you said, another layer of instability, maybe violence.
Yeah, I mean, the situation is still developing. So it's a fluid situation to really comment on. But the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is not like any other church. It is the substance of what Ethiopia is, or at least presents itself to be. Ethiopia is known as, maybe erroneously, that as an island, a Christian island, a sea of Muslims. not taking into account that part of the sea of Muslims are in Ethiopia. They're all Ethiopians as well. But this is an Ethiopian institution. It defines Ethiopianness, at least in the northern sense. This is what actually it defines its culture, Ethiopian national culture. It's a state church. The first patriarch was appointed in around 330 AD. So it's a cultural icon. It's a religious institution. It's the fountainhead of Ethiopian official culture. There have been incidents in Ethiopian history where there were religious schisms within the Ethiopian church between Gojam and Wallo and Gondar. The issue today is not really about doctrinal differences. It is mainly economic and institutional dominance. The issue is that 85% of the Holy Synod in Addis, ostensibly dominated by people from Gondar, not even Amhara, but Gondar, and two regions in Gondar that dominate the Holy Synod. The rest of Ethiopians who are Orthodox within that system have now basically rebelled. They have simply they tried to work it within the institution, to work out within the institution, but they have found a novel way today of trying to reduce at least the influence of the 85% by saying that three archbishops, this Ethiopian law, the Fitaha Nagist, allows three archbishops to appoint. And what they're saying is that we have appointed bishops for the purposes of proselytization, nothing else. We're not doing anything. We're not taking away any office. We're not destroying the institution. All we are doing is carrying out the Great Commission that the head of the church had given to them, and they're acting within the purview of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church tradition, and this is really pried open the Orthodox Church and challenging the stronghold of northern Ethiopia on the rest. What I am concerned about that is that the issue of economics and land. And from what I've heard, about a third of the churches are in Tigray, and about a third of the churches of the EOC are in Gondar, and the rest of it, the third of the churches are in the rest of Ethiopia. But the economic foundation of that church is basically in the other parts of Ethiopia. So the conflict is shrouded in ecclesiastical and liturgical or canonical or doctrinal terms, and that is the shape that it is taking. But it is an issue of economics, and the ones that have dominated the Orthodox scene are determined to keep the situation as it has always been, and the South is basically the South Ethiopia are basically rebelling against it. And it seems that the people in the South are accepting, cheerfully accepting and cheering their leaders, and even lionizing them for doing so. So if the Orthodox institution, the Orthodox Church institution, the Holy Synod is trying to confront the Holy Fathers who have now given that appointment to 26, they have vowed to name another patriarch. If this happens, well, this becomes really a schism. And from what I'm hearing, that the supporters of the status quo are ready to fight it out. So it is really schism within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, but it will have implications outside the church itself. So this is also another threat to peace and stability. But it's also that the outsiders are unable to really enforce um, their will, observing human rights. Because in Europe, for instance, in divisions have emerged inside the European Union on how to approach Ethiopia and transform this temporary ceasefire into sustainable peace. But what is the controlling authority in the debate within the European Union and in the United States is not really about Ethiopia. There is an increasing concern about the danger of losing Africa to the Chinese and to the Russians. The Chinese have lured African leaders, um, providing them loans, and Mr. Putin has extended his reach in Africa through the Wagner group, and now the foreign minister has visited Eritrea. And what he said in Eritrea and what Russian observers are saying is that Eritrea is going to be the gateway into Africa for Russia. So the Europeans and the Americans are really spooked, and they have started to de-emphasize, to downplay the importance of human rights. The German minister and the French foreign minister are not talking about the United Nations investigation. They have encouraged the Ethiopians to follow through with accountability. Nowadays, the Europeans are in favor of the Ethiopian human rights agency to conduct the investigations and accountability system within Ethiopia. They seem that they don't want to lose Ethiopia and the rest of Africa to the Chinese and to the Russians. That the issue of justice and accountability and concern about human rights in general is falling by the wayside. So internally, the dissension within the Orthodox Church and outside and externally, Europeans really giving up on human rights in general, not to lose Ethiopia and Africa to the Russians, to the Chinese. It seems like it's a bleak future in that area where the worst dictator in the world, in the name of Isaias Afewerki, now has a patron, albeit weak by itself, but determined to have their own slices in the current scramble for Africa. So the instability might come from the reign of the dictators in the Horn of Africa, but the situation is really precarious.
Thank you for that, Skell. Duke, I just want to come to you through the lens of how politicizing accountability, politicizing peace has been, the fear in many Tigrayans, given that even the negotiation, everything that happened in Pretoria, Nairobi, and what might follow would eventually undermine the issue of accountability, etc. So, what is your reading? What is your insight in terms of what Tigrayans should do instead of waiting for the US to do this or the European to do that? What do you think should be done in terms of peace, holding the peace, as well as accountability?
Well, the accountability part is a very difficult challenge. I believe we talked about it last week when the force that's accused of most of the war crimes and the worst of the atrocities wins the fight. It's very difficult to establish accountability. The United States is supposed to be committed to this. The UN is supposed to be committed to this. Other UN member states are supposed to be committed to this, but we've seen how far those commitments reach. They don't last. I mean, Ethiopia has run afoul of its international commitments, but so has the United States, so has the UN. as far as Ethiopia goes. I think he's right that people are not looking at Ethiopia as what would help Ethiopia. They're looking at it as a vehicle for either some Russian dominance or U.S. dominance or Chinese dominance over Africa or over the Horn of Africa. I'm not sure how successful Russia will be with Eritrea as a springboard, but it's very possible that they could gain a lot of ground, particularly if Ethiopia is still on board playing ball. But as far as accountability goes, just documenting what's happened. There are in in the United States, in other areas of the free world, there are universities, there are people who are trying to document what's happened in Tigray, and that I mean, I wish that there was a better. I wish I could say that Ethiopia is going to set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but if they did tomorrow, I don't think many people would believe it. I mean, they'll set up something. There'll be some sort of reconciliation. It's not going to be what it claims to be. There'll be some sort of accountability, but I think we're going to see another handful of soldiers being thrown in jail for crimes that they may or may not have committed by excusing the rest of what's going on. But I mean, even the sense of accountability, when it looks very much like the Amhara regional forces are going to be repaid for their willingness to fight with territory from Tigray. When it looks like Eritrea is going to be repaid with territory from Tigray, that they're going to not leave, that they're going to consider part of their own, a very lucrative territory when it comes to Amhara and the fertile areas of West Tigray. When those are promised for cleansing the area of Tigrayans, then there's going to be no accountability for that. The accountability is just completely out the window. So I don't see accountability. I don't see how that's going to happen. Hopefully, at some point, an international institution, the International Criminal Court, could do something. The mechanism that they set up for compliance with the African Union is meant to confirm. It appears it's meant to confirm that the TPLF has let go of their weapons. It's ostensibly supposed to make sure that the ceasefire is being maintained, that forces are being drawn down, and that sort of thing. But when you look at the very important articles of the Pretoria Agreement, Article I think 4 and 5, which talks about the protection of civilians and the unfettered access for humanitarian aid, there's no language in the implementation agreements about how the African Union is going to monitor that, because they can't. This isn't something for the African Union to monitor, because there's nobody, the UN, the United States, any member nation of the UN does not have the ability to just offload human rights or offload crimes against humanity monitoring mechanisms to a disinterested third party. These are things that we have to take seriously, and unfortunately, we're not taking them seriously in the United States or in Ethiopia. We're not taking them seriously around the world, and this is a huge retreat from human rights. That I'm not going to say that the Trump administration had much concern for human rights, but before then, there was more activity. When you looked at what was happening in Syria, when you looked at what was happening around the world, there was some, we at least put up a good fight. At this point, we're not even pretending anymore. It seems like we're just allowing for accountability not to happen in Tigray. And if that doesn't happen, we're going to find out if peace can hold without accountability. We're going to find out if everybody in the peace building field is wrong about accountability being essential for enduring peace. And that seems to be what we're headed towards.
Great, thank you, Doc, for that. I think that in this our program today, if you don't have any final thoughts that is missed or you want to pass on, Faisal.
Yeah, no, I think I don't want to comment much about the faction that appeared between the different church groups, but I have a hunch that there is an element of liberation theology involved in the South. They, theology is not always free from politics. It is intertwined. So we have a long way to go. I think as the scale is described, there are representation issues, historical issues. In the East, the church is considered as the number one tool to colonize. So history has always been controversial. Now with Ethiopians becoming more liberal and open at least at certain levels, the church would be questioned. And those who believe in that church's unity will raise a lot of issues. In terms of the US, I honestly believe we overemphasize the good nature of the US foreign policy towards Africa. It has never been a positive policy that America carried towards Africa. In the 70s, the number one client for the US was Mobutu Sese Seko, Hafat Bonye. I mean, Africa's dictators were financed and maintained by the US. And I think in the last 10 years, the US lost what Carter built, which was to center US policy around the issue of human rights. That is abandoned. Today, you cannot really pinpoint what drives the US policy towards Africa except competition with Russia and China. And they are losing, US is losing that because the nature of Chinese investment appeals to Africa more than the US does. You had last week South Africa defying the US government and striking some deals unexpectedly with Russia. In the case of Ethiopia, what do we expect the US to do in the Tigray conflict? That to really tell Abiy the right course and force him to do the right thing? Well, they haven't done that. Actually, they refused to do that. They resisted to do that. They resuscitated a dying autocrat to now become powerful, buy more weapons, start a new war in Oromia. All that because they don't want to anger him. So I think overemphasizing what the US can do or doing is, in my opinion, is missing the point. I think what could happen, and I'm afraid of this, if the deal fails or doesn't hit the target we want and reconciliation doesn't happen, a new generation of Tigrinya resistance will probably come out in defiance of TPLF. TPLF will mutate into the Mustafa Akbar type or Abdisa type, and then there could be a hook between the new generation of Tigrinya fighters and the Ola and others. That is the long trajectory we have to look if we don't get, as Duke said, a true reconciliation that appeals to all. We don't see that on the ground. Nobody's working. UN is not working. The US is not working. EU is not working. And we are left with Abiy, who is playing games with TPLF and, for that matter, engaging a very devastating war with Ola.
That's right.
Great. Thank you so much, Faisal, for that. Gentlemen, as usual, we have had a very insightful evening today, and many are following us live online. And this will be broadcast to the Horn of Africa as well on satellite under Horn Broadcasting Services, HBS. And thank you for tuning in on today, and see you next week. Good night. You have been following us live. This is a weekly H panel on UMD Media. UMD Media works on understanding, measuring, and doing. And it strives to contribute for an evidence-led, evidence-rich discourse and decision-making in the Horn of Africa. Thank you. Good night.